Hey everybody, just a quick update before the video starts. As you might be able to tell, my voice isn't sounding too good. I'm a little under the weather again. I do have new content. I wanted to get it out both on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and today, but I don't feel my voice is up to it at the moment, so I went ahead and put together the compilation video for March so I could give you an update, and will try my best to get the new content out tomorrow. Thank you everybody for being here, and I hope that you enjoyed the compilation video, and I hope everything will be better tomorrow, and if so, I look forward to the new video.
Come home. I definitely want this story to be anonymous. Once you listen to the entire thing, I think your viewers will understand why. Sometimes, even though a story needs to be told, it also should be done in such a way that doesn't bring unwanted attention upon those it happened to. It's difficult being a single parent, especially when you have very young children. My eldest at the time of this story was a 13-year-old boy, and my younger child was a 10-year-old boy. Their father left a few years before this happened. I hadn't been able to contact or even find him. I had to work 2 jobs in order to pay for everything, since I didn't have any child support. I also refused to not provide as much as I could for my children, but that also meant that I didn't see them a whole lot. For the first couple of years after their father left, my sister would stay home with them while I was at work. But unfortunately, she had to relocate for work, and this left me without a babysitter. However, my older boy was really responsible, and Lord knows I was left at home a lot when I was his age, so I agreed to let him babysit. My children rode the bus to school, and I always saw them off. More often than not, however, I would not be there in the afternoon when they got home. They were directed to go home, and not answer the door or phone for anyone other than me. This process had been in place for several months, successfully, when the events of the story took place. In the afternoon and evening, I work in a benefits call center, so I'm used to answering the phone constantly. This evening I heard the phone ring and picked it up. After introducing myself, I asked the customer if I could help them. All I heard was a voice saying, "You should come home." Then there was a click, and the line was disconnected. I didn't know what to think at first. I hadn't checked which line was blinking, so I thought for a moment that I could have accidentally picked up the personal line. However, the only people who had that number were my sons and my family. I almost then dismissed the phone call as nothing more than a prank call, something that people working in call centers are used to getting every now and then. Still, I wondered if maybe I should call my sons and check and see if they were doing all right. However, before I had a chance to do this, the phone rang again. This time I did look at it, and it was indeed my personal line calling. Picking up the phone, I simply said, "Hello?" Once again the voice said, "You should come home." Then it clicked, and that was it. I immediately became very concerned. I couldn't think of who could have possibly been calling me. I didn't recognize the voice, and I knew it was not someone I had given the phone number to. Every weird call or urban legend started flooding through my mind, and I knew I had to call my kids and see if they were okay. Before I could call out, however, the personal line rang again. I was hesitant to pick it up, because I was just sure it would be the same thing again. There was not a caller ID on the phone, so I couldn't tell who it was. Slowly, I picked up the phone and said, "Hello?" "Mom, Bobby said he saw someone in our backyard. He thinks it is Dad, but I don't think so. What should we do?" I wasn't sure how to respond at first, never having been in such a weird position before. But I told them to go into my room and don't answer the door or reveal that they are home. I would call the police and would get home as soon as I could. I called the police and told them what was going on. I then informed my boss and said that I had to go, and she told me to. I left without even thinking of signing out of my computer or anything. The whole ride home was just me worrying. It didn't help that there were like 3 police cars outside my house when I arrived. The only thing that did help, though, was seeing my 2 sons sitting safely in one of the patrol cars. Sitting in one of the other cars was their father. Trying to piece together what happened, I found out a lot of things that I wish I never had to. He was wanted by the police in a different state for murdering his girlfriend. That was 2 weeks prior. Although I was relieved to know that he had no intention on hurting his children, he was using them to try and lure me back home. And although he didn't admit to wanting to kill or hurt me, it was assumed and rather obvious that this was his intention. Then, he had the phone number because he had called the house earlier and talked to Bobby, who had answered the phone when he shouldn't have. He told Bobby not to tell his brother, but that is why Bobby knew it was his father in the backyard. Thankfully, my ex is serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. The Boogeyman. When my oldest son was really young, he got really scared of our basement. I mean, he would actually be terrified of going down there for any reason. And it sort of came out of the blue as well. I mean, we didn't really use the basement for much at all. It was not a finished basement, and the only way you could get into it was outside the house. It took up about half the size of the house under the house. The rest of the house had a crawl space under it. The only things that we could keep under there were things like bicycles, or anything that wasn't paper or cloth. Only things that could get wet. When it rained, water would always get into the basement, and there was a drain for it, so it never flooded, but it wasn't an ideal basement for anything else to be put in. Because of what the basement was like, I can understand him being afraid of it. I mean, it was dark and musty, and you couldn't see into the crawl space at all. It didn't bother him when he was really young, but when he got to be around 10 years old, that is when the basement became an object of terror for him. It first started when he was outside while I was working in my garden. I asked him to go into the basement to get something for me. It was so long ago that I cannot remember what it was, but I guess that's not important. He didn't come back for a long time. Finally, when I went to go and check on him, I saw him standing halfway down the steps. When I asked him what was wrong, he didn't answer me at first. And finally, he simply asked me if I could just go and get the item for myself. He didn't mention anything about why he did not want to go into the basement, and he didn't mention that he was afraid of everything. Coco Taylor may have been disappointed because she goes down in the basement all the time, but I didn't even mind. I could tell that something was bothering him, so I was more than willing to get the item. After that day, he would never even go through the basement door. He was constantly afraid of the basement and became convinced that the boogeyman was living down there. Now, this was odd to me because I never told him about the boogeyman. I wasn't into scaring my son. But I figured at the time that this happened, he must have just picked it up from some friends at school. In the beginning, I didn't see this as a big deal. At his age, it really was normal to be scared of some creepy thing, and the basement definitely seemed creepy. I knew that it was something that he would just outgrow. A few months after all this began, just the 2 of us were home. My son was taking a nap, and I needed to make a run to the store. I never left him home by himself at his age. However, he had been really exhausted, and we lived in a really safe neighborhood. I would only be gone a short time, so I locked everything up and quickly ran to the store. When I got home from the store, I heard my son crying. Concerned, I ran to his bedroom. I heard him, but didn't see him. It turned out that he was in the closet crying. When I asked what was wrong, He at first refused to tell me. However, I eventually pried it out of him, and when I did, it was terrifying what he told me. The boogeyman living in the basement came into my room, he told me, and he threatened to kill me if I told anyone he was there. I didn't hesitate to ask him to explain. I immediately called the police. I had watched too many stupid people make stupid mistakes in horror movies. I didn't want to be that person. The police got there and searched the basement. They found a man in our crawl space. He was a creepy-looking guy, and I could see why my son would think this guy was the boogeyman. But even creepier, he had an area set up in our crawl space that he had obviously been living in. And even creepier than that, he had some erotic pictures of me that I had taken from my husband a long time ago. The very first time my son went into the basement, he had seen the man for a brief moment. When he asked if someone was there, the man simply replied back, "I'm the boogeyman." The creep went to jail for a short time, and an order of protection was put on him. I have, to this day, never seen him again. My son is a senior in high school and seems happy and adjusted, unscarred by this incident. Letters. Honestly, what is more fun than that very first time as a teenager that your parents let you stay home by yourself? And I am not talking about while they go to dinner or to go see a movie. I mean when they leave on vacation or to visit relatives and they give you permission to be home by yourself for a week. It is hard to imagine anything else being such a moment to look forward to when you are that young. For me, it was when I was 16 years old. My parents decided to go on a cruise for their honeymoon. They actually offered to take me along with them, but I had no interest in going on a cruise ship. Actually, although I didn't admit this to them, I'm sort of scared of ships and being out on the water. My mom was going to see to it that I stayed with some relatives, but my dad decided I was old enough to be by myself for a while. Mom was sort of reluctant, but my dad was able to convince her that it was a good idea. Well, the first couple of days were happy as can be. I didn't have any friends over, or any big or small parties. It was nothing like that. I just reveled in the idea of having the house all to myself. I watched a lot of movies, played a lot of video games. I walked around in my underwear, or even less after taking a shower. Just the normal sort of thing that a teenage boy would want to do. Then, on the third day, I went to check the mail. The only thing in the mailbox was an unaddressed envelope. It had my name on it, but that was all. So I opened it up, and it was a secret admirer card. There was no writing in it, and it was unsigned. I thought it was odd that there would be no writing, but I didn't worry about it. I thought it was cool to have a secret admirer. Other than that, though, I put the card aside and just really didn't think about it anymore. So anyway, the following day, I was hanging out in my living room in just a towel after I had taken a shower. I heard the mailman come. Once I was sure he was gone, since all I was wearing was a towel, I went to check the mail. This time there was actual mail in the mailbox. However, there was another envelope that had nothing but my name on it. I opened it, and this time there was something else in it. It was like an index card, and it had an equal sign and a closing parentheses sign on it, so it made a smiley face. And that was it. And much like the last time, there was nothing else to indicate who the letter could have been from. Again, I didn't think it was too weird. I just figured it was something from this new secret admirer that I had. So I put it aside, and once again, had it put out of my mind. The following day, things changed just a little bit. This time, there was another envelope addressed to me, but it was a packed envelope. I brought it inside and opened it up. What was in there was nothing short of shocking and terrifying. They were pictures of me from the past few days, and they were pictures of me doing everything. Some were just of me playing games, but others had me walking around in a towel. Some had me naked in my bedroom after taking a shower and before getting dressed. There were a couple of me smoking pot in the living room, and plenty of the pictures appeared to be taken from close up, meaning that someone could have been just outside my window. I didn't know what to do. I know that the immediate response most people might have is to call the police. However, I couldn't do that. There were pictures of me smoking pot, and although I didn't have to turn those over to the police, whoever had taken the pictures surely had copies of them themselves. If my parents would get to see those, there would be no telling the level of trouble that I would be in. I just couldn't do it. And I figured that was the very reason the pot-smoking pictures were put in there, to keep me from going to the police. I did the only thing I knew I could do. I went to every single window in the house and pulled down and shut the blinds. I made sure all the doors and windows were locked. I took a big kitchen knife and had it with me the entire time I was in the house. The rest of my time home alone wasn't horrible, but I was scared most of the time. I kept expecting to get another letter from whomever this was, but that didn't happen. It wasn't so bad during the daytime, but the nights were scary. I spent the entire time in my home, dark and isolated from the rest of the world. I was as looking forward to my parents coming home as I had been for them to go in the first place. When they did come home, I was further scared that whomever had left me the envelopes would send another, but they didn't. But it was a long, long time before I began to feel comfortable in my house again. With my parents home, I couldn't keep the blinds down all the time, and I always felt like someone was watching me. The mine. I once had the very unfortunate luck to be caught out in a storm while I was out exploring. Fortunately for me, I was quite familiar with the area. I had not gone blindly out into the wilderness like happens a lot in these kind of stories. I like to explore old mines, and I was out that day looking for a particular mine. Early in the morning, when I was driving into the area, I noticed that it looked like it was going to rain. And that was okay, but not totally ideal. Mines can very often attract water and get very wet during the rain. That makes them very difficult, if not impossible, to explore safely. However, I was going to an area with several mines that I wanted to take a look at. So I thought if I beat the rain, I could get a couple of hours of them done before things got bad. I was having what was a pretty good day for a while. I was able to check out quite a few mines with no problem. Although it looked constantly like the rain would come bearing down on me at any minute, it stayed at bay. But it was as I was nearing another mine that things began to change a bit. Though it had been cloudy all day, there really hadn't been any thunder or lightning or anything. However, that changed suddenly when an enormous lightning bolt flashed across the sky. The thunder crash that followed it was deafening. I assumed that with the thunder coming, that the rain would be coming shortly after. I guess I had no real reason to be thinking that way, but it was what was in my mind. I almost considered skipping the mine and heading back to my car. However, my curiosity got the better of me. I decided to go ahead and check out the mine. If I got a little wet on my way back to the car, well, it would be worth it. Well, it began to rain just a little bit, right before I got to the mine. Fortunately, though, the mine was completely dry, so I would have some time to explore it before things got bad, if they ever got bad at all. I did make it to the mine just in time, too, because the rain started falling really heavy at that point. The storm just got fierce as hell, too. The thunder and lightning was more constant than in any storm I could ever remember. I went pretty deep into the mine. It didn't seem like the mine was getting much water runoff from the storm, and that was a good thing. It also meant that if I continued, I could actually wait out the storm in the mine. I had gotten deep enough that I couldn't see the portal anymore. After a while being down there, I decided there wasn't much else to see, and began heading back. And that was when I was surprised to hear voices carrying down the mine. They were coming from the direction to the portal, which meant that someone else had decided to seek shelter in the mine. I didn't think much of this at first. There is nothing wrong with a couple more people in the mine. But as I listened more to what they were talking about, I actually began to get very afraid. There were at least 3 distinct voices talking, and what got me was that one of them was suggesting they just drop something off in the mine. The other 2 insisted this was a bad idea, and they should drop it off where they normally do. This mine was not far enough away, and would likely attract explorers. It was during the course of the talk that I realized what was going on. This was a group of criminals, and they were discussing disposing of what seemed to be described as a human body. When I realized this, I felt my insides go cold. But this wasn't as scared as I was when I heard another suggest they just take the body deep enough into the mine, and maybe it would be far enough back that explorers wouldn't go so deep. I did my best not to react, but deeply hoped they would not plan on doing such a thing. If I was right and they were hiding a body, there was little that could stop them from killing me if they found me and knew I had overheard them. Part of me told myself to run back deeper into the mine, while another told me to just sit there and keep listening, quietly. While I could hear them, I would at least be able to know what they were planning on doing. They decided to see how long the storm was going to last before they decided what to do. They didn't want to be out there all day, so if the storm did last way too long, they would leave it in this mine. Of course, the only thing I could think about was the storm ending as soon as possible. I didn't know how heavy it was still raining due to being so deep in the mine, and I couldn't see the portal anymore. But it was torture sitting there, listening to these men, and wondering when the storm was going to end. I didn't know exactly how long I was in the mine waiting. I didn't dare turn the light on my watch on to see. Even if they wouldn't be able to see the watch, I didn't care. I would not take the chance. All I could do was try to remain still and wait. And eventually, the storm must have ended. I heard the men talking more, and they decided to leave the cave. But even after they left, though, I remained still for a while. I not only had to be sure that they were out of the cave, but I had to be sure that they had time to get far enough away that I wouldn't chance running into them. Still, I had no idea how long I waited. But when I finally decided enough time had passed, I began making my way back to the portal. Even though it seemed like a long time since the men had left, I wasn't planning on taking any chances. Upon leaving the mine, I was apprehensive. I figured I would be going in the opposite direction of the men, since they were trying to get further into the wilderness, and I would be headed back toward my vehicle. However, there really was no way for me to know where they were going, really, and I had no idea if I would run into them. I was fortunate to not run into anyone. I got back to my truck, and I left that area, and I never went back. I still explore mines, but I find them in other areas now. The appearance. When I was a child, I was deathly afraid of thunderstorms, and I always got some crap about it from the other kids in school. When it was storming in school, I would visibly react in such a way that set up people making fun of me. The one who would make fun of me the most was a guy named Joey, who was a schoolyard bully anyway. But he would mock me, call me names, and push me. There were times when I would try to get away from him, and he would physically restrain me, push me to the ground and worse. He was a pretty despicable person. Unfortunately, though, I only had to deal with him at school. When I was home, I was able to go into my room when there was a storm and just be there. I had brothers, but they never gave me a hard time about it. Still, that didn't keep me from being afraid when the storm was going on. I remember this night. My family was in bed. My parents always went to bed early because they got up to go to work before us kids got up to go to school. There had been a storm moving in all day, and this kept me from being able to fall asleep. As I lay in bed, the house slowly got darker as everyone else went to bed in their rooms. After a while, I finally felt like I was all alone in the house, because I was sure I was the only one awake. I never asked for a nightlight or anything like that. I felt that although my parents would have gotten me one, I would have felt like I failed them or something by not trying to be brave. I was awake long enough, and my eyes did get pretty adjusted to the dark. However, it was still hard to see anything. The lightning flashes gave me brief moments of visibility, followed by darkness, as my eyes had to work to get adjusted to the dark again. During one flash of lightning, something caught my eye. I could have sworn I saw the door to my closet move just a little. I tried to dismiss it, because seriously, it was just 1 second that I was able to see. It seemed unlikely I would be able to really detect movement in that amount of time. I watched the door. I kept waiting for another movement or something to show me something that caused me to confirm or dismiss what I saw. And there was finally, after what seemed like several long moments, another flash of lightning. Once again, I thought I saw the door move a little, and this time I could have sworn that the door was sitting further open than it had been before. I shuddered, really worried, but I really decided it was just my fear making me think that this was going on. So I decided to face my fear. "There's no one there, is there?" I asked. It seemed like a long wait. There was no response. I almost half expected someone to say no, like in a cheesy movie. In fact, in spite of myself, that made me smile a tiny bit. The lightning struck again, and the moment that it did, my closet door slammed open. I saw a figure come out of my closet. However, my eyes needed time to readjust, so all I could see was a shadowy figure coming towards me. It grabbed me by both arms, and then pushed me hard against my bed. Some voice I couldn't recognize, that was dark and scary, made some growling comments that I couldn't make out. With my eyes shut, I screamed for my parents. I felt the figure let go of me, and I heard some noises in the room. Within moments, my lights were turned on by my parents, who came to check on me. My dad immediately noticed that my bedroom window was wide open, and that the screen was removed. All I could figure is that someone had removed the screen, and that had given them access to my bedroom, in and out. I never knew who was exactly in my room, but I had always expected it to be Joey. He always made fun of me, but he made some comments that I'm sure he thought were coy about the previous night's storm. Plus, he was just the kind of sociopath that would try and pull something off like that. He was the demented jackass who ended up getting expelled and was in prison by the time he was 18. Into the woods. It was a dark and stormy night. Lightning flashed. I screamed. Okay, that's just me being silly. I always wanted to do that. But I did have a very scary occurrence due to being in a thunderstorm once. So I thought I would share it because it really is different than the ones that we normally hear. Like a lot of people nowadays, I enjoy exploring things. I don't do urban exploring yet, although I would probably like to in the future. At the moment, I do rural exploring, and I live in an area in which it is perfect to do that. I live out in the Rocky Mountains, so as anyone who has ever been there can tell you, there is more rural territory than you can explore, than you can imagine. This particular event happened when I was taking a couple-day hike. I checked the weather over and over again to make sure it would hold up. But of course, anyone who has ever been to a weather website knows that they mess up all the time. The first day was warm and beautiful. The sky was blue and amazing. It was a great looking day. The following morning was fine too. But then around noon, I began to notice it. I began to see those black clouds moving in, and green clouds moving in. And they weren't just dark, they were the darkest clouds I had ever seen in my life. And then I saw them from far off in the sky. But they came rolling in quickly, and like the darkest blanket you have ever seen, they covered the entire sky. It was barely noon, and they succeeded in becoming so dark and opaque that it quickly became nighttime during the day. I wasn't readily prepared for such weather. The lightning and thunder began right when the clouds were rolling in, and there were loud cracks of thunder, and the fiercest yet most beautiful, I have to admit, display of lightning that I had ever seen in my life. Some thunderbolts branched out over and over in these miraculously beautiful yet terrifying displays of nature, and the thunder was like someone firing a shotgun off right beside me. I thought about putting up my tent for shelter, but the winds were so fierce I was not sure I would be able to do that. It would probably blow away before I even staked it into the ground, if not afterward. I really only had one option. I had to keep looking around and hoping I would find some sort of shelter. There were a lot of mines and caves in this area. I was hoping I'd be able to find one of them. It was getting really bad outside, but it hadn't begun raining yet. That was the one thing that I felt protected me from truly being in a bad situation. I was grateful, so I kept searching around trying to find anything at all. I had a feeling that once the rain began coming down, that it was going to come down hard, not only soaking me, but stinging me as it hit me. I lucked out. Although I didn't find a cave or a mine, I did find something that I hadn't expected. I found an old, small, abandoned cabin. Well, I assumed it was abandoned, of course. And it was, at least for that day. So I took shelter in the cabin. When I was in that house, I found a book, bound in human skin, and written in blood. Okay, I'm kidding again. I always wanted to do that too. Seriously, it wasn't a bad little place. It had some really old furniture in it still. It almost looked like somebody could still have been using it, but I wasn't sure. Anyway, no one was there, and when the hard rain began finally falling from the sky, I learned that the roof was fine and not leaking. I really felt like I had lucked out. When the rain began falling, I realized that I had really lucked out. The rain was pouring down hard. I would have been soaked in seconds, and it would have been dreadful. But it was still dark outside, except when the lightning brightened it up. And that is when it happened. The loudest explosion I'd ever heard. Outside the window I looked and saw this blinding orange light. It was only a second before the side of the cabin crumbled in the orange fire. And all I could figure is that a bolt of lightning must have hit either a tree or the cabin or both. But I only had a couple seconds to even think about it as the force of the explosion actually knocked me across the room where I hit my head. I was worried. very worried. I hit my head really hard and felt like I was about to pass out. I had to get out of the cabin before I died in the fire. But when I tried to get up, I fell over, and then everything was black, right after I realized I would be caught in the fire. I awoke a short time later, quickly remembering the fire. However, when I looked across the room, there was no fire. I squinted my eyes and thought about it for a moment. The rain was still pouring, as it had been when it first began falling. Although that side of the cabin was destroyed, the rain must have put out the fire before it could get much further across the cabin. I actually was fine and reasonably dry. The cabin had another few small rooms, so I went into one of them to relax. I guess some people think that maybe I should have left in case there was another strike, but I didn't. I wasn't going to go out in a storm that fierce for anything. The storm carried on all night. It was terrible, and by noon the next day, I was able to leave that area and thank my lucky stars that I hadn't been on that side of the cabin when that explosion happened. I probably would be dead if I had been. Uncle Charlie's. This is my mother's story. Although my Uncle Charlie died when I was 7 years old, I do have very pleasant memories of him. He was a nice and pleasant man, and he was Uncle Charlie to everyone, whether he was your uncle or not. He was married to my great aunt Sybil, so he was technically my uncle. I also remember his house. They lived out in the country. The house was on the side of a hill with a gravel driveway. If you were in the house at night, you would always know when a car pulled up in the driveway, because you would hear the crunching on the gravel and see the headlights shining into the house. My mom's cousin Roger was like her best friend. They did a lot of things together. Some thought Roger may have been a little crazy or lying when he told them about an experience he had in the house. He was home alone at night. He heard the crunching of the gravel in the driveway as a car was driving up the driveway. After a moment, he then noticed the headlights coming up the driveway. He heard someone get out of their car and walk up to the house. However, no one actually came inside the house. He was confused and went outside, thinking that something was wrong. When he got out there, he didn't see anyone, and there was no car in the driveway. He would have known if the car had left, even if its headlights did not come on. He would hear it driving on the gravel, but there was nothing. Well, needless to tell you, this scared the crap out of him. Not only that, but no one really believed him either. He was a teenager, and you know how people often think teenagers just make things up for attention. Even my mom, who was great friends with him, didn't really believe him. And then one evening, my mom was over at the house with Roger. As I mentioned, they were very good friends, and it wasn't abnormal for people in my family in that area to go out and leave the kids at home alone. At nighttime, they were watching TV with the lights off. They were in the living room, and that was when both of them heard the crunching of tires driving up the gravel driveway. As usual, this was followed by the headlights shining into the window. They shone, and then when the car stopped, they went out. There was the sound of somebody getting out of the car and slamming the door. This time, they heard the person walking around the side of the house. They then heard the side door of the house being opened and then shut. Footsteps then walked down the hallway into the bathroom down the hall. And they waited for a moment or so, but they did not hear anything else. They wondered, of course, what was going on. So they got up and went down the hall to see who it was that had come home. It could have been Uncle Charlie. It could have been a cousin, an aunt and uncle, or anyone. This was on a weekend, and it was not unusual for all sorts of relatives to come to Uncle Charlie's home. and generally everyone just let themselves in. But there was no one in the house at all. The side door of the house was locked. They went over to the front window to look out into the driveway. There was no car in the driveway. There was no one out there and no indication that anyone had been out there. Worry set into both of them. They went outside and called and looked around, wondering if a family member was playing a joke on them, but they found no one. Scared, going back into the house, my mom absolutely believed Roger now. They turned on the lights and locked all the doors and waited for Uncle Charlie to come home. Shadow. On one of KOC's streams, I heard him talking about having partial seizures. I thought it was brave to talk about that, because I had them too, but I don't like bringing it up. I guess it makes me feel weak or something, but I wanted to share my story about it. I've had epilepsy my entire life. Although full seizures are rare, they do happen. But partial seizures are more common, even when I have been taking my medicine. Most of them are accompanied by auditory hallucinations, but there are some visual ones as well. The one that I always get more often, visually, was of the shadow figure. I don't really know what else to call it than that. It was a dark, filled-in shape of a person, more or less. I tended to see the shadow person when I was more likely having a migraine or something like that. But I got used to it after a while, and it stopped scaring me very much. I didn't really mention it to many people, other than my family. Like I mentioned in the beginning, I don't like really talking about my epilepsy too much. When I was about 13 years old, we had moved to a new neighborhood, about a year before the story took place. It was hard making new friends, mostly because the people who lived in that area had known each other for a really long time. So I very much felt like I was on the outside, trying to find a place to fit in. I lucked out, and that around the time my family moved to that area, another boy my age did too. Since we had problems making friends with the other people, we both became pretty good friends. I had been dealing with the partial seizures for some time by the time that we had become friends. His name is Alex, by the way. Although I didn't tell too many people about it, I did make sure that he knew. We spent enough time together that in case I had a full seizure or something, it was something that he should know about. But other than that, we never talked about it. Alex and I both had sleepovers at each other's houses pretty often too. It was necessary, because we played so many video games and often well into the night, that it was just normal for us to fall asleep in the room we were in at some point. After about 6 months, from the time that Alex and I had become friends, we were in my room playing video games. My parents were both asleep long before either of us fell asleep. I don't recall how late it was before I dozed off on my bed. I was woken up, though, by Alex shaking me awake. He must have turned the game system off after I passed out, because it was dark in the room. I was very groggy and I tried to get my bearings, but I found it very hard to do so. "What's going on?" I asked him, still half asleep. Alex tried to tell me something, but then he stopped. He tried to tell me a few times, but for some reason he kept stopping, before telling me what was wrong. "Alex, are you okay?" I asked, now getting concerned. I don't even know how to bring this up," he began. His voice was hesitant and I could tell he was very afraid. "Tell me what?" I asked. I think your house is haunted," he told me. That was definitely not what I had been expecting to hear from him. "Why would you think that?" I asked him. "Well, I went to the bathroom about 5 minutes ago, and when I turned on the light, I saw a shape standing behind the shower curtain," he told me. "I don't know how else to describe it, but it was as if a shadow was standing up on its own." Well, of course, that surprised me. When I asked him to elaborate, he described, in essence, the shadow person that I had been seeing for years. This was something that I had never told him about, and always thought he was simply a hallucination caused by my seizures. My family had never seen him, and I knew they would not have told Alex about it. Hell, even if they had, I still knew Alex was telling the truth. His fear alone told me that. What really struck me as odd is that the Shadow Man was something I'd seen in the home before the one Alex saw him in. So if it is a ghost and not a hallucination, then it somehow followed me from one home to the other. I still live at home, and I've seen him a few times since. However, there's now a dread associated with him that I had never had before. I'll be going off to college soon, and living in a dorm room, and I have to wonder if he will follow me again. The night I became a ghost. Many people may be familiar with the concept of astral travel. Supposedly, this is the ability to separate one's astral body. The only other way I think to express it is the soul from one's body, so that the soul can take spirit journeys to other realms, while one's body is left safely at home. Shamans in many human cultures throughout history have presumably trained themselves to take such journeys regularly in order to gain occult knowledge or insight about the future, about a person's health, or perhaps to take a peek at other dimensions. There also have been reports of spontaneous astral travel, where the event just happens to a person without their conscious control. People who experience near-death experiences often report their souls rising up, looking down and seeing their bodies lying below them. I once had no opinions about astral travel, one way or the other. I neither believed it nor disbelieved in it. I simply didn't know. Then an experience happened to me one night. It started out much like any other night, except that I felt more tired than usual, and had decided to retire early. I recall it was a lovely winter night, very close to the Yuletide, and a gentle snow was falling outside. I snuggled down in bed to listen to my favorite YouTube channel, preparing myself for sleep. I felt very comfortable, and was just drifting off, when I felt an unaccustomed lifting, a sense of weightlessness. I felt as though I were floating and suspended in air, rather than sinking into the oblivion of a consciousness, as usual, and that my consciousness had shifted. I was hyper-alert, more even than when in a waking state. I opened my eyes and, lo and behold, I found myself floating near the ceiling, looking down at my inert body, peacefully lying in bed, faintly illuminated by the glow of my laptop screen. I marveled at this situation. I had not sought this. I had not expected it. It was just happening without any effort on my part. Oddly, I felt no fear, none at all. I just assumed that I was dreaming. Was this what people call a lucid dream? Is so-called astral travel and so-called lucid dreaming one and the same? I had no idea. I just found myself, with some part of myself, marveling at the experience. Two things I remember were the sense of weightlessness and the lack of any physical discomfort. I felt buoyant and light and rather excited by it all. I also felt a strong desire to leave, to fly, to spread my wings as it were. The nearby window beckoned me, and before I knew it, I was on the other side of it. Opening it had not been necessary. All I knew was that I was free. I didn't feel the coldness of the winter air at all, but I was flying very swiftly through it, flying very swiftly indeed, as if with the power of a single thought. Soon I found myself over a vast dark ocean. The water looked very cold and unbroken as far as my eyes could see. Soon I reached land again, and found myself in a town. It wasn't any town I was familiar with. The houses seemed strange. They looked old. They were all covered with the same wooden clapboard siding, stained deep brown and unpainted. All these buildings were close together, attached, in fact, as townhouses are. Some of the buildings had 3 or 4 floors, others were lower, but they were all attached. I don't know why, but I got the impression I might be in a Scandinavian country, although I've never been to Scandinavia. The night was very dark and it seemed very cold, although I couldn't feel it, and flakes of snow were drifting about in the air. I found myself being drawn to one particular lighted window among this pile of buildings, one of the taller houses. Before I knew it, I was through this window and inside. It became immediately apparent to me that a big party was going on. A holiday party, as it was to Yule. There was much light, laughter, and chatting. People were moving about, sitting or standing with drinks in their hands. They all were dressed very nicely. I specifically remember a tall, attractive blond man leaning against a counter that separated the wide entrance hall from an open concept kitchen living room area where many other people were. This man was wearing a lovely knitted jumper or sweater. He was holding a drink and chatting with another man. I moved closer to these people, only to realize that they had no cognizance of me at all. I even waved a hand before their faces and they didn't react. Clearly I was entirely invisible to them. I was, in essence, a ghost. I didn't overly marvel at this interesting situation. I more or less accepted it and began moving from room to room, exploring the house. What amazed me more was how vivid everything seemed. I could discern every detail of my surroundings, the furnishings, the people, the activity, the sounds. I recall that one room was filled with toys. After making a circuit of the downstairs rooms, I came out once more into the wide entrance hall, which included a wide staircase of dark hardwood, balustraded, with the same on both sides. The wood was rather scuffed and worn with age, but the whole house, although it clearly was older, was very well appointed and comfortable. It had good vibes. 2 children sat on the stairs, a boy and a girl, looking between 8 and 10 years old. They were chatting and playing happily, and also were dressed in their holiday best. The girl wore a bright red dress with white lace trim. The boy wore blue slacks and a jumper. I approached them with the idea of moving beyond them, and hence up the stairway to explore the upstairs. But at this point, something rather shocking happened. The little girl looked up, and suddenly her eyes focused right on me. Her eyes widened, her entire face filled with utter terror, and before I knew it, she emitted a piercing scream. When this all happened so fast, I remember thinking, "Do you mean that you can actually see me?" Because all the adults could not. For some reason, obviously, I was visible to this girl. In an instant, I felt myself being pulled back. It was rather like the sensation I imagine a telescope might feel when it's being retracted. The entire scene before me collapsed. I was back in bed and awake, with the voice from my laptop droning away next to me. The experience remains for me one of the most profound that I could perhaps label as paranormal, although it was very much different than most that you hear about. Usually a narrator recalls an experience of seeing a ghost, often when they were a child. In this instance, it was I who was the ghost. It is perfectly natural, I suppose, for people to react with fear and shock when they suddenly see someone or something that shouldn't be there. I suspect I might feel just the same. But I wonder if every encounter of this sort need be seen as malevolent. Perhaps many so-called ghosts are merely what I was on that particular winter night. An unexpected soul traveler who finds themselves gypsying in places just as strange to them as they may seem to the rare and gifted person capable of detecting their presence. Since this time, I have begun a course of self-training, and today I am capable of taking astral or lucid soul journeys at will. I have been many places and met many interesting people on these journeys, and have gained much insight that I would call profound, but I have never encountered the little girl in the red dress again. My experiences thus far have shifted my former view of what I define as supernatural. Maybe someday such experiences will become perfectly natural. Maybe someday we will recognize ghosts as just fellow souls who, voluntarily or involuntarily, are having a go at parting some interdimensional curtain. And if we catch sight of someone peeking in at us, we can just wave and say, "Hello."